from a Swedish perspective, I think even in Sweden and Anders Tegnell and the team there have done a good job, and they by themselves have said that even despite the measures they put in place, the issue for them was in not having had adequate protection for long-term care facilities, and they suffered very high death rates because of very high death rates amongst older people, particularly those in facilities. They also had issues of transmission amongst ethnic minorities as well. So nobody has come through this pandemic with a perfect strategy. Everyone is learning about the virus. The approach in Sweden of having, and again, there's a misunderstanding that Sweden has not implemented control measures. Sweden has implemented quite strong control measures for COVID. But what it has done in the main is try to rely on individuals and communities to comply with the advice of government, and it has tried to avoid imposing mandatory lockdowns, mandatory separation of individuals. And that's based on a very high level of trust historically between government in Sweden and its own population. And that is the way in which Swedish people and the Swedish government interact. That is the social contract in Sweden. But it is wrong to suggest that Sweden has had an altogether different approach to the rest of Europe. In fact, it has had an approach of light touch regulation of the process. In that process, they have suffered with high death rates in long-term care facilities, and by their own admission have said that in itself was an error in not providing adequate support or care or protection in those situations. And I think that's the case in many, many countries. We're taken aback and surprised by the high rates of death and the high rates of infection in long-term care facilities amongst older people and people with underlying conditions. So from that perspective, and we all have to learn how to live with this virus. I've said at previous press conferences that there is a point at which we, in learning to live with the virus, we try and find a way to keep our societies as open as possible, while at the same time breaking chains of transmission and controlling the infection. Now, how do we find a way to control the infection, suppress the infection, break chains of transmission, and at the same time open up our societies? And these are almost impossible concepts to reconcile. How can we calibrate our response to do the least damage to our society but the most damage to the virus? And can we sustain those behaviours? Can we sustain that process for long enough through which time as we can have a vaccine? There are no correct answers to this. The context of each country is entirely different. The social contract is entirely different. The relationship between government and populations is entirely different. And each government has to find its way with its population to control the disease. And there are lessons to learn from every country and its approach. No country has done it perfectly. All countries have made mistakes, but all countries have done some things correctly. And we should look at Sweden. We should look at the model. We should look at their approach to see what elements of sustainability, what elements and ways they have learned to live with the virus, and learn from what has been done well and what has been not done not so well in all countries, including Sweden.
Thank you, Dr. Ryan. Okay. No further interventions from the room. The next question.